Hey, my name is Owen. I'm 32 years old, and I run a small repair shop on Mill Street in Vernonia, Oregon. The sign out front says, Hadley's Fix It, because it was my father's shop before it was mine, and I never saw a reason to change the name. People bring me what's broken: toasters, lawnmowers, table legs, zippers, clocks, screen doors, anything that stopped doing what it was supposed to do. I take it apart, find where the stress was, and put it back together. Most days that's enough. My routine doesn't take long to describe. I wake up at 6, make coffee in the same chipped mug I've used for 4 years, open the shop by 7:30, and work until the light starts going or the last customer leaves, whichever comes first. I eat lunch at the counter, usually a sandwich I made that morning, sometimes leftovers from the night before. I close up around 6, drive the 11 minutes home to a 2-bedroom house I bought with a loan I'm still paying off, heat up whatever's in the fridge, and sit on the back porch if the weather allows it. On Fridays, I pick up a 6-pack from the general store. On Sundays, I mow the yard if it needs it. The phone doesn't ring much after 7. I'm not unhappy. I want to be clear about that. I have work I understand, a house that's mine, a truck that runs. But there's a particular kind of quiet that settles into a place when only one person lives in it. And after a while, you stop noticing the quiet itself and start noticing the things that would break it. A second voice, a door opening when you didn't open it, the sound of someone else's footsteps on hardwood floors. I'd stopped expecting those sounds. That's not the same as not wanting them. Claire left 2 years ago. Not dramatically, no fight, no slamming door, no scene that would give me something clean to point to and say that's where it ended. She packed one suitcase on a Tuesday morning, set her key on the kitchen counter, and said she couldn't keep waiting for me to want more than this. I didn't argue. I should have. I stood in the doorway and watched her pull out of the driveway. And I thought about all the things I'd fixed in my life and how none of them had prepared me for the moment when the thing breaking was standing right in front of me, asking me to say something. I didn't say anything. She drove away. The house got quiet, and it stayed that way. That Friday evening in mid-October, the rain came down the way it does in Vernonia, when fall decides it's finished being gentle. Not a drizzle, not a shower, just a steady, serious downpour that turns Mill Street into a shallow river and sends everyone indoors an hour early. I was locking up the shop. The last customer had come and gone around 4, a teenager with a skateboard truck that needed a new bushing, and I'd spent the rest of the afternoon rebuilding a mantel clock that belonged to someone's grandmother. The rain was hammering the awning so hard I could feel it through the doorframe. That's when I saw her. She was standing under the awning of the old bakery next door, the one that had closed in March and never reopened. She was fighting with an umbrella, not using it, fighting it. The canopy had inverted in the wind, and 2 of the ribs were bent at bad angles, the fabric bunching and catching, and she was trying to force it back into shape with both hands, while the rain soaked her from the shoulders down. She had dark hair plastered flat against her neck, a canvas tote bag pressed against her chest like she was protecting whatever was inside it, and a thin green jacket that had stopped being waterproof about 10 minutes ago. She wasn't crying. Her jaw was set hard, and she was yanking at those ribs like the umbrella had personally wronged her, and she was going to win this one even if everything else had already been lost. I almost kept walking. My truck was parked 30 feet away. I was tired. I had a pot of chili waiting at home and a porch that would be dry enough to sit on if I dragged the chair back against the wall. I didn't know this woman. I didn't owe her anything. But something about the way she was standing there, soaked through, refusing to quit, alone on a street where every other door was already dark, made me stop. It was the refusing that did it. I know what it looks like when a person is used to handling things alone because no one else is going to. I walked over. She looked up. Her eyes were brown, and they had that particular flatness that comes from being tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. "That's not going to work," I said. "I know." She didn't stop pulling at the ribs. "I can fix it. I've got tools inside." She looked at me like I'd offered something that didn't exist in the world she'd been living in. Then she looked at the umbrella, then at the rain, then back at me. "You fix umbrellas? I fix everything." She handed it to me without another word. Her fingers were red from the cold. I took it inside, set it on the workbench, and popped the ribs back into their channels. One of them had a hairline bend that would fail again in a good wind, so I reinforced it with a small piece of wire and crimped it tight. The runner was stiff. Someone had never oiled it, so I hit it with a drop of silicone. The whole thing took maybe 3 minutes. When I brought it back out to her and opened it with a clean snap, the canopy held perfectly. She took it from me and stood there under it, the rain drumming steadily on the fabric above her head, dry for the first time in what looked like a while. She stared at the umbrella like it had done something impossible. Then she said, very quietly, "My husband never did that." I didn't know what to say to that. I said, "It was just a bent rib." "No," she said, "it wasn't." She thanked me. She walked away down Mill Street in the rain, the umbrella holding, her green jacket dark with water. I locked the shop and drove home, and heated up the chili, and sat on the porch and thought about the way she'd said it. Not angry, not sad exactly, just factual. Like she was reporting the results of a long experiment she'd finally decided to stop running. I didn't expect to see her again. She came back the next morning. The bell above the door rang at 10:15, and she walked in carrying the canvas tote bag and a paper cup of coffee she'd gotten from the gas station down the road, because there's nowhere else in Vernonia that serves coffee on a Saturday morning. She set the coffee on my counter, not for me, for herself, and pulled a small leather handbag from the tote. The zipper was separated from the fabric along one side, the teeth still good, but the tape pulling free where the stitching had rotted. "Can you fix this?" "Probably. I'll sit down if you want." She sat in the wooden chair by the window, the one customers use when they're waiting, and watched me work. She didn't talk, I didn't push. I re-sewed the zipper tape with a curved needle and heavy thread. It took about 20 minutes because the leather was old and dry, and I had to be careful not to crack it further. When I handed it back, she ran the zipper 3 times, opening and closing it with the kind of attention you give something when you're checking whether the world has decided to start working in your favor again. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing. 20 minutes. 20 minutes is 20 minutes. It's fine." She looked at me with an expression I would come to know well over the following weeks, a kind of stubborn assessment, like she was measuring whether I was being kind because I wanted something, or because I just was. She must have decided on the second, because she said, "Then I'll bring you coffee tomorrow, the real kind. I saw a French press at the thrift store on 4th. You don't have to do that." I know I don't have to. That's the whole point. Her name was Nora. I learned it that Saturday, somewhere between the zipper repair and the moment she stood up to leave. Nora Ashland. She was 29. She'd arrived in Vernonia 4 days earlier with one suitcase, the canvas tote, and a reservation at the Riverside Motel that she'd paid for with the last clean transaction on a credit card she was about to cancel. She didn't tell me all of that at once. It came out over days, in small pieces. The way a person unloads a heavy bag, one item at a time, when they're not sure the shelf will hold. She came back on Sunday with a French press and a bag of dark roast from the general store. She made coffee in the shop's back room, which was mostly storage and a utility sink, and brought me a cup without asking how I took it. Black. She'd either guessed right or didn't care. "You always this quiet?" she asked, settling into the window chair like it had become hers. "Depends who's asking." "Me? I'm asking." "Then yes." She almost smiled. It didn't quite reach her mouth, but I saw it touch her eyes for half a second before she looked away. She pulled a paperback from her tote and read, while I rebuilt a table lamp with a frayed cord. The rain was softer that day, just a steady tapping on the roof, and the shop felt different with 2 people in it. Fuller, like the space had been holding its breath and someone had finally told it to exhale. She came back Monday and Tuesday. By Wednesday, I'd stopped being surprised when the bell rang at 10:15. She always brought coffee. She always sat in the chair. Sometimes she read. Sometimes she watched me work. Sometimes she walked around the shop examining the things on my shelves, the unclaimed clocks, the salvaged radios, a wooden music box someone had brought in and never picked up. She touched things carefully, turning them over slowly, like a person who has learned that not everything will be taken from her if she reaches for it, but hasn't fully trusted that lesson yet. On Wednesday afternoon, I was trying to realign the hinge on a kitchen cabinet door a woman had brought in, and Nora put her book down and watched for a while, and then said, "Your shim's too thick. Use a playing card instead." I looked at her. She shrugged. "Thinner shim, cleaner gap. My grandfather taught me that." She was right. The hinge sat flush. On Thursday, she picked up a small electric fan I'd been putting off because the motor had a whine I couldn't locate. She turned it in her hands, unscrewed the back casing without asking. I noticed she selected the right screwdriver without checking the size, and looked inside. "Your capacitor's wrong," she said. I set down what I was holding. "It's a 3 microfarad motor. You've got a 2 in there. That's your whine." "How do you know that?" She set the fan on the bench. "My grandfather ran a radio and electronics repair shop in Beaverton for 31 years. I spent every summer there from age 8 to 17. He taught me to solder before he taught me to ride a bike." She paused, and the pause had weight to it, the kind of weight that means the next sentence costs something. "I don't talk about it much." "Why not?" She shrugged again, but this one wasn't casual. It was the kind of shrug you give when the honest answer is too heavy for the moment. "David, my husband, thought it was strange. A woman who knows her way around a soldering iron. He said it wasn't something he could explain to people at dinner parties." She picked up the fan. "Do you have a 3 microfarad cap?" I did. She replaced it in 4 minutes flat. The fan ran silent. I looked at the fan. I looked at her. She was already putting the screwdriver back in the exact spot she'd taken it from, handle facing the same direction. "Nora, you can work here if you want. I'm not offering charity. I'm behind on about 15 jobs, and you clearly know what you're doing." She studied me for a long time, long enough that I was certain she was going to say no. Then she said, "I'll work mornings. I'm not taking money until I've been here a week, and you've decided I'm actually worth it." "That's not how. Those are my terms, Owen." I learned quickly not to argue with her terms. The shop changed, not in any way a customer would notice at first, but in ways I noticed every single day. She rearranged the back shelf so the components were organized by type instead of whatever order I'd shoved them in over the years. She started a log for incoming jobs. Who brought what? what the problem was, what was done, what was charged. She cleaned the front window I'd been meaning to get to since April. She found a better supplier for solder wire and saved me $11 a month, which she mentioned once and then never brought up again. We moved the heavy workbench on Friday morning. She wanted it angled differently so the light from the window hit the work surface instead of reflecting off the tools. I told her it was fine where it was. She told me it wasn't. We argued about it for 3 minutes, both of us with our hands on the edge of the bench. And then she said, "Owen, you've been squinting at your soldering for 2 years because the glare catches you right in the eyes at 2 o'clock every afternoon. I've watched it happen 3 days in a row. Move the bench." We moved the bench. She was right. The glare was gone. While we were pushing it into place, her shoulder pressed against mine, and neither of us moved away. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Neither of us mentioned it. Gene Hollowell came in that afternoon like he always did on Fridays, carrying a pair of garden shears that probably didn't need sharpening, but gave him an excuse to sit for 20 minutes. Gene was 63, retired from the lumber mill, and had been coming to the shop since my father's time. He looked at Nora behind the counter, looked at me, looked back at Nora, and settled into the second chair, the one I'd brought from the back room earlier that week, because the window chair was permanently occupied. "New hire?" he said, something like that. He watched Nora work on a clock mechanism for a full minute, the way you watch a person who knows exactly what their hands are doing. Then he looked at me with an expression that was part amusement and part something older. "Shop looks different," he said. "She cleaned the window." That's not what I mean, and you know it. I knew what he meant. I didn't say anything. The rain kept coming, the way October rain does in that part of Oregon, constant and gray and so steady that you stop hearing it as sound and start feeling it as atmosphere. A low weight in your chest that slows everything down and makes the walls feel closer and the light feel warmer. Nora and I worked side by side in that rain sound for 2 weeks. We fell into a rhythm the way 2 people do when their work fits together. I handled the structural repairs, the carpentry, the blade sharpening, the mechanical things that needed force and patience. She handled the wiring, the circuitry, the small, precise work that needed steady hands and a mind that could trace a signal through a maze of connections. We didn't talk much while we worked. She hummed sometimes, nothing I recognized, just a low, tuneless sound that meant she was concentrating. I learned the rhythms of it. I learned that she bit the inside of her cheek when a wiring problem wasn't yielding, that she washed her hands twice after handling solder, that she ate exactly half of whatever lunch she brought and wrapped the rest carefully for later. That last one told me something about the kind of careful she'd had to become with food and money and everything else. One evening, she stayed late. The shop was closed, and the rain had settled into something heavy and deliberate, the kind that turns the road to the motel into a dark river you don't want to drive alone. I made coffee with her French press, and we sat at the workbench with the overhead light throwing warm yellow across the tools and the scattered parts of a vintage radio I'd been restoring for 7 months. A 1961 Zenith console someone had left on a curb in Portland. I'd driven 2 hours to pick it up because I could see what it had been, and I believed it could get there again. Nora ran her finger along the edge of the cabinet. "You drove to Portland for this?" I did. "It must have been beautiful once. It will be again." She looked at me. Then she looked at the radio. Then she said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Why did you stop that night? With the umbrella?" "You were heading home, I could tell. You had your keys out and you were walking toward your truck. Why did you come back?" I thought about it. I could have given her a simple answer, that she looked like she needed help, that it was raining, that I'm the kind of person who stops. But none of those were the real reason. And by then, I'd learned that Nora could hear the difference between a real answer and a comfortable one. Not in the way I can hear the difference between a healthy engine and one that's about to seize. Because you were trying to fix it yourself, I said. You weren't standing there waiting for somebody to come along. You were pulling at those ribs in the rain like you were going to make that umbrella work through sheer stubbornness. And I recognize that. I know what it looks like when someone's used to handling everything alone because nobody else is going to do it. And I thought, maybe you shouldn't have to. Not tonight. She held her coffee with both hands and was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was even and measured, the way you speak when you've gone over something so many times that the sharp edges have worn smooth. David and I were married for 3 years, she said. He's a financial consultant in Portland. Nice house, nice car, nice friends who went to the right schools and said the right things at the right restaurants. Everything was nice. And I spent 3 years being the quiet one at every table. The one who smiled and nodded and never mentioned that she could rebuild a radio from parts because that wasn't something that fit the picture he'd decided we were. She set the coffee down. He never hit me. I need to say that first, because people always want to know, and the answer matters. What he did was smaller than that and slower. He made me less, a little less every day. He decided what I wore to his firm's events. He decided what I said about my background, which was nothing. He decided that my grandfather's shop was something embarrassing, something from a class of life I was supposed to have moved past. He'd introduce me as my wife Nora, and then steer the conversation so I never had to say much. And after a while, I realized the steering wasn't to protect me from awkwardness. It was to protect him from whatever I might say that didn't match the version of me he'd built. She paused. After 3 years, I looked in the mirror one morning, and I couldn't find a single thing that was mine. Not one. The rain hit the windows in steady waves. The clock on the shelf behind us, the one she'd repaired her first day, ticked in the silence. The umbrella broke on the courthouse steps, she said. I'd just filed the separation papers. I walked outside and the wind caught it and 2 ribs snapped and I stood there holding this broken thing and I thought, of course that's how today goes. The one thing I brought with me, and even that won't hold. She looked at me. And then you fixed it. In 3 minutes. Like it was the simplest thing in the world. It was simple. Owen. Her voice was very quiet and very steady. It was everything. Not because of the umbrella. Because you looked at a broken thing and you didn't throw it away. You didn't tell me to buy a new one. You didn't make me feel stupid for trying to fix it myself. You just took it inside and made it work. And nobody had done anything like that for me in 3 years. I didn't reach for her hand, though I wanted to. I sat with the weight of what she'd said, and I understood. The way I understand when a mechanism has been running under strain for too long. You can feel it. A tightness in the gears, a friction that shouldn't be there. That what Nora had been carrying was not just a marriage that ended, but the slow, deliberate erasure of every part of herself she had valued. And the umbrella, and the zipper, and the fan, and the pricing conversation, and the window she cleaned without being asked. Those weren't just tasks. They were pieces of herself she was putting back where they belonged. You're rebuilding, I said. Something behind her eyes shifted. Like a spring releasing tension it had held so long, it forgot what straight looked like. Yes, she said. That's exactly what I'm doing. That night, after she left, I sat in the shop for a long time looking at the zenith. half finished. 7 months of careful work, one part at a time, testing and adjusting and testing again. I'd picked it up off a curb because I could see past what it was to what it was supposed to be. And I hadn't been able to explain to anyone why that mattered enough to drive 2 hours for. Sitting there in the quiet shop, I understood. 3 weeks after Nora started working at the shop, a black sedan pulled up on Mill Street that did not belong in Vernonia. It was the kind of car that cost more than most of the houses on the block, freshly washed in a town where the rain made that pointless, and the man who stepped out of it looked like he'd been assembled from a catalog of things meant to make other men feel small. Tall, clean-shaven, charcoal overcoat, the kind of watch you see in the advertisements you skip past. He stood on the sidewalk and looked at the shop the way you look at something you've already decided is beneath your time. The bell rang. He walked in. Nora was at the side bench, resoldering a connection on a vintage desk lamp. She looked up. The iron stayed in her hand, but her whole body went still in a way I had never seen. Not the stillness of concentration, but the stillness of someone who has heard a sound they spent weeks hoping never to hear again. "Nora," the man said. "So this is where you've been." "David." Her voice was controlled and flat, but I saw her knuckles go white around the iron. He looked around the shop slowly. He looked at the shelves, the tools, the clocks, the workbench where I was standing. He looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture you're deciding whether to move or discard. "I've been calling," he said. "Your mother finally told me you were somewhere out here playing handyman in some little town. I changed my number." I noticed. He stepped closer to her. "This is getting dramatic, Nora, don't you think? Running off to the middle of nowhere, working in a..." He looked around the shop once more with a small, patient smile. "Whatever this is. A junk shop. You've made your point. Come home." "I don't have a home with you, David. I filed the papers." "Papers can be withdrawn. We both know that." "They won't be." The patient expression on his face didn't change, but something underneath it tightened. A familiar kind of tightening. The kind I've seen in stuck bolts and seized hinges. In things that have been forced into a position for so long they've forgotten how to move naturally. When those things finally give, they give hard. "Nora," he said, and his voice dropped into something quieter, the kind of quiet that isn't gentle. "You are embarrassing yourself. You're living in a motel. You're soldering in a repair shop. Do you hear how that sounds? My partners ask about you. Our friends ask about you. I have been patient. I have given you space. But this..." I set down the screwdriver I was holding. I didn't slam it. I didn't make a scene. I just placed it on the bench and stepped around until I was standing between the counter and the side bench where Nora sat. "She told you she filed the papers," I said. "She told you they won't be withdrawn. That sounds clear to me." He looked at me. Really looked, for the first time. I could see him measuring and categorizing. Small town, blue collar, flannel shirt, calloused hands. Not a threat, not worth considering. "This doesn't involve you," he said. "It's my shop. Everything that happens in it involves me." "And what exactly is your interest in my wife's..." "Ex-wife," Nora said. She set the soldering iron in its stand carefully. She stood up. She was shorter than both of us, and she was wearing a flannel shirt with solder burns on the cuffs, and her hair was held back with a rubber band she'd taken from my parts drawer that morning. And she looked more certain of herself than anyone I had ever seen. "David, I am not coming back. Not because of Owen, not because of this shop, not because I'm being dramatic. I'm not coming back because this week I fixed a fan and someone said nice work instead of asking me to keep quiet about it. I ate lunch at a counter and nobody decided what I should order. I cleaned a window because I wanted to, not because someone told me the house needed to look a certain way for people I didn't choose. These sound like small things to you. I know that. But they're mine. Every single one of them is mine. And I'm done letting you decide which parts of me are presentable. The shop was completely still. The clock ticked on the back shelf. Rain ran down the window she'd cleaned. David stood there waiting for her to waver, the way she must have wavered 100 times before. A small hesitation, a softening, the opening he'd learned to use. But Nora didn't waver. She stood beside the workbench with solder residue on her fingertips, and she did not move, and she did not blink, and she did not give him a single inch of ground. He left. The bell rang once, sharp and bright, and then the black sedan was pulling away from the curb and disappearing down Mill Street. Nora sat back down at her bench and picked up the soldering iron, and her hands were shaking. Not a lot. Just enough to see. I walked to the back room and made 2 cups of coffee and brought one to her and placed it where she could reach it without having to ask. Then I sat at my bench and started working on the radio. After a while, her hands went still. After a while, the iron was steady. After a while, she said, without looking up, "Owen, yeah, thank you for standing there. I didn't do anything. You did exactly enough." I drove her to the motel that night because the rain was heavy, and her car, an old Civic she'd bought for cash from a lot in Hillsboro, was making a sound I didn't like from somewhere in the timing belt. I told her I'd look at it in the morning. She stood under the motel awning holding the umbrella, the same umbrella, the one from that first night, and she looked at me through the open truck window. "I meant what I said in there," she said. "All of it. But especially the part about the fan. The 3 microfarad capacitor." She almost laughed. It was the closest thing to a full laugh I'd heard from her. And it opened her face completely, a flash of someone who had not always been this careful, this guarded, this measured about where she let her softness show. "Good night, Owen." "Good night, Nora." I drove home. The house was quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet, not empty, waiting. The days after David's visit had a charge to them that I didn't know what to do with. The shop ran the way it ran. Customers came and went. Gene brought his shears. Nora fixed a toaster someone had given up on, and I caught her smiling at it when it popped, a small, private smile. Like she and the toaster shared an understanding about what it means to work again after someone decided you were finished. We ate lunch at the counter side by side. We passed tools without asking. But underneath all of it, in the spaces between words and the moments when our hands almost touched over a shared workspace, something was gathering the way pressure gathers before weather breaks. Gene came in on Friday. He sat in his chair. He watched us work, me at the main bench, Nora at the side counter, and he was quiet for longer than usual. Then he said, to the room more than to either of us, "You know, Harold Hadley always said a good repair isn't about making something new. It's about helping something become what it was always supposed to be." I looked at him. He looked back with 63 years of patience in his face. "Just something I remembered," he said. "No particular reason." That Saturday the shop was closed, but I came in anyway because the zenith was close. So close I could feel it, the way you can feel a job nearing completion. One more connection, one last adjustment to the tuning capacitor, and it would either sing or it wouldn't. Nora showed up at 10. No coffee. She stood in the doorway with her jacket damp from the walk and said, "Is today the day?" "Maybe." She came and stood beside me. Close. Close enough that I could smell the plain soap she used. Motel soap, Nothing chosen to impress anyone, nothing that belonged to anyone's idea of her but her own. She looked at the radio, at the new tubes I'd sourced from a dealer in Eugene, at the wiring she'd helped me trace the week before, at the cabinet I'd sanded and refinished across 6 separate weekends. 7 months, she said. 7 months. On a radio someone threw away. Someone threw it away because they couldn't see what it was. She was quiet. Then she said, "Owen, I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." "Okay." She leaned against the workbench. She crossed her arms, not defensively, more like she was holding herself together long enough to get the words out in the right order. "I came back that first Saturday because of the zipper. That's what I told myself. But the zipper was an excuse, and I think we both know it. I came back because you fixed my umbrella in 3 minutes, and you didn't ask me why I was standing in the rain crying. You didn't look at me like I was something broken that needed to be managed. You looked at me like I was a person with a broken umbrella, and you fixed the umbrella, and that was the whole interaction. And I hadn't been seen like that, just seen as a whole person, not a project or a problem or a reflection of someone else, in so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like." She paused. Her voice was steady, but there was a current running underneath it. "I've been coming back every day for 3 weeks. And somewhere in the second week, it stopped being about the shop. I think you know that. I think you've known for a while, and you've been too careful to say anything. And I understand why, and I respect it. But I can't keep sitting in that chair pretending I'm here for the coffee." She looked at me. Her arms were still crossed, but her face was open in a way that I could see cost her something real. "I'm not asking you for anything," she said. "I just needed you to know." I stood there. I looked at the radio. I looked at the tools on the bench. I looked at the woman who had walked into my shop in a soaked green jacket and fixed my pricing, and replaced a capacitor I'd been too stubborn to check, and organized my shelves, and stood in front of the man who had spent 3 years erasing her, and told him that a repaired fan and a clean window and a lunch eaten in peace were worth more than everything he'd built around her. "I've been fixing things my whole life," I said. "It's the only thing I've ever known how to do well." When Claire left, I told myself, "Okay, that's the one thing I can't fix. Some things are broken in places you can't reach, or they were never put together right to begin with, and you have to accept that." And I did. I got good at accepting it. I made it a whole way of living. I stopped. The words were there, but they were tangled, like wires in a box I hadn't opened in years, and I had to be careful pulling them out. "But then you came in and you fixed that fan in 4 minutes, and you looked at me like I'd handed you something enormous when all I did was my job, and I started to think that maybe I hadn't been accepting anything. Maybe I'd been giving up. And there's a difference, a big one." She uncrossed her arms. She reached out and placed her hand on the workbench. Not on my hand, just in the space between us, like an offering and a question at the same time. "You are really slow, Owen. You know that." "I've been told. 3 weeks. I have been sitting in that chair for 3 weeks, giving you every signal I know how to give. And you've been over here rebuilding a vintage radio. It's a very important radio." She laughed. A real laugh, full and warm and startled out of her, like it had been waiting behind a door she'd finally stopped guarding. I put my hand over hers on the workbench, and her fingers turned and laced through mine. And we stood there in the quiet shop with the rain drumming on the roof and our hands together on the worn wood. And I understood something I should have known a long time ago. Fixing things and building things are not the same work. Fixing is restoration. You find where something broke and you bring it back to what it was. Building is different. Building is making something new that didn't exist before, and trusting that it will hold weight you haven't tested yet. I reached over and turned on the Zenith. I'd been afraid to try. 7 months of work, 7 months of care, and if it didn't play, then I'd have to decide whether to keep going or to accept that some things don't come back, no matter how much patience you pour into them. I turned the dial. There was a hiss, a crackle, a long second of nothing. And then, warm and clear and impossibly alive, music filled the shop. An old jazz station out of Portland. A trumpet, a piano, a bass that pulsed steady and low like a heartbeat that had always been there, waiting for someone to listen. Nora squeezed my hand. "See?" she said quietly. "Some things just need someone who doesn't give up on them." 6 months later, the sign out front still says, "Hadley's Fix It." But if you look through the front window, Nora cleans it every Thursday. She's particular about it. You'll see a second workbench along the side wall with its own lamp, its own tools, its own small radio tuned to whatever she wants to listen to that day. She filed for her electronics repair license in December and had it by February. She handles everything with a circuit board. I handle everything without one. Between us, there isn't much in Vernonia that can't be put back together. She moved out of the Riverside Motel in November and into the spare bedroom of my house, which lasted exactly 11 days before she moved into mine. She didn't make an announcement. I came home one evening, and her coat was on the hook beside mine, and her books were on the nightstand, and her shampoo was in the shower, and she was in the kitchen making pasta with a sauce she'd found on a video and adjusted 3 times because she said the original didn't use enough garlic, and the person who wrote it had clearly never tasted their own recipe. "I hope this is okay," she said. "Your coat's already on my hook. I can move it. Don't." Gene comes in every Friday, same as he always has. He sits in his chair. Nora reupholstered it in dark green fabric in late October and refuses to let anyone else sit in it. And he watches us work the way you watch something you've been quietly hoping to see for a long time. Last week he brought his wife, Margaret, who brought a casserole still warm in the dish, and set it on the counter and looked at Nora and looked at me and said, "Well, it took you long enough." Gene said, "I've been telling him that for months." Nora said, "He's slow. We've thoroughly established this." The divorce was finalized in January. Nora kept her name. She didn't ask for the house, the furniture, the savings, or anything else she was legally entitled to. She said she wanted to start with nothing that had his fingerprints on it. And I understood that, in a way, I couldn't fully articulate, but felt in my chest the way you feel a part finally clicking into its correct position. A small, clean sound that tells you the thing is right. The Zenith sits in our living room now. It works perfectly. Most evenings we sit on the couch and listen. Old jazz, old country. Sometimes a crackling AM broadcast of a game neither of us really follows. And the house is full of sounds. 2 voices, 2 sets of footsteps, 2 coats on the hook by the door, and 2 mugs in the drying rack, and the particular noise of someone else breathing in the next room when you wake up at 3 in the morning and remember you are not alone. None of it is perfect. The radio drifts off frequency and needs adjusting. The porch step I repaired in September is creaking again. Nora and I argue about inventory systems and pricing and whose turn it is to sweep and whether jazz piano is superior to trumpet, which it absolutely is not. And she is absolutely wrong, and we will never agree. And I would not trade a single one of those arguments for all the silence in the world. But she is here. Every morning when I open my eyes, she is there. And every evening when I lock the shop, she hands me the keys the ones she had copied in November without telling me. And we walked to the truck together, and the umbrella hangs on its hook by the shop door, oiled and tightened and holding steady, the way things hold when someone has taken the time to fix them right. I had once believed my life would only ever be quiet repairs and silent rooms and the kind of steady, livable loneliness you can carry if you don't look at it too directly. But Nora had stood under an awning on Mill Street with a broken umbrella and a jaw set hard against the whole collapsing world. And I had turned around. And from that single turning, I had been given everything. Not because I saved her. I didn't save her. She was already saving herself the night I met her, standing in the rain, pulling at those bent ribs, refusing to stop. All I did was hand her the right tool at the right moment and step out of her way. Sometimes that's all it is. Not a grand repair, not a blueprint or a plan. Just one person seeing another clearly, handing them what they need and trusting them to do the rest.